On the morning of September 14, 1986, flames tore through a modest two-story home on Ashford Avenue in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles. By the time firefighters brought the blaze under control, the structure was a hollowed-out shell, its secrets seemingly consumed by the inferno. But this was no ordinary house fire. This was the final act of one of the most audacious crimes in Los Angeles. History, a carefully orchestrated theft that would remain hidden for more than 2 decades. The crime involved exactly $1.1 million in cash, stolen from the Century Plaza Financial Center in downtown Los Angeles. The money vanished without a trace during what appeared to be a routine weekend. No alarms were triggered. No forced entry was detected. For weeks, investigators couldn't even determine exactly when the theft had occurred. The thief was Deshaun Porter, a 32-year-old night custodian who had worked at the financial center for 6 years. He was a man so unremarkable, so thoroughly invisible to those around him, that even after the theft was discovered, he never appeared on the initial suspect list. For 22 years, Porter lived with his secret. He moved through life quietly, working ordinary jobs, living in ordinary neighborhoods, giving no indication of the fortune he had carefully hidden. And he might have taken his secret to the grave if not for a routine inspection in 2008, when a fire safety officer named Gerald Williams noticed something impossible, a detail that would unravel everything. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Deshaun Porter grew up in South Central Los Angeles during the 1960s and 70s, the youngest of 4 children, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nursing assistant. He learned early that invisibility was a survival skill. In a neighborhood where standing out could mean trouble, Porter perfected the art of being overlooked. He was an average student, neither brilliant nor struggling. He played basketball but never made varsity. He had friends but was never the center of attention. Even his high school yearbook photo seemed somehow forgettable, his smile polite but distant. After graduating in 1972, Porter bounced between jobs, warehouse work, delivery driving, security guard positions. Nothing stuck. By 1980, at age 26, he was living in a cramped studio apartment in mid-city, struggling to support himself and sending what little he could spare to his aging mother. That year, he took a job as a night custodian at the Century Plaza Financial Center, a gleaming 30-story tower on Figueroa Street that housed investment firms, accounting offices, and a private wealth management company called Westbridge Capital Group. The building was prestigious, its lobby adorned with Italian marble and modern art installations. But Porter entered through the service entrance each night, pushing his cleaning cart past the expensive decor without a second glance. His shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 nights a week. He mopped floors, emptied trash bins, and wiped down conference room tables. The work was monotonous and poorly paid, but it was steady. More importantly, it was solitary. For 8 hours each night, Porter moved through empty offices like a ghost. Westbridge Capital Group occupied the entire 23rd floor. The firm managed money for wealthy clients, handling everything from estate planning to international wire transfers. Porter cleaned their offices every Tuesday and Friday night. He emptied the wastebaskets in the reception area, vacuumed the conference rooms, and scrubbed the bathrooms. The routine never changed, and for the first 3 years, he barely registered what went on in those offices during business hours. But in 1983, something shifted. Porter's mother suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to work. The medical bills were catastrophic. Porter found himself drowning in debt, working extra shifts whenever he could find them, but never making enough to climb out of the hole. He watched his mother's condition deteriorate in a nursing facility he could barely afford, and he felt the weight of his own powerlessness crushing him. It was during this period that he began to truly notice the world around him at Westbridge Capital Group. He noticed the careless way partners left sensitive documents on their desks. He noticed the casual discussions about moving hundreds of thousands of dollars with a simple phone call. He noticed the rhythm of the office, the patterns of security, The blind spots in the surveillance. The 23rd floor had security cameras in the main corridor and reception area, but none in the individual offices or the back hallway that led to the records room. The building's alarm system was sophisticated for its time, but it operated on a simple principle: motion sensors that were deactivated floor by floor as cleaning crews worked their way up the building. Porter's supervisor would radio building security when the crew reached each floor, and security would temporarily disable that floor's sensors. The system relied entirely on trust. Porter began paying attention to the weekend schedules. Westbridge Capital Group closed at 5 p.m. on Fridays and didn't reopen until Monday morning. During that window, the offices sat empty and dark. The building's weekend security consisted of 2 guards who rotated between the lobby and a monitoring station in the basement. They made rounds every 2 hours, but those rounds were predictable, following the same route through the same floors at the same times. For months, Porter simply observed. He took no action, made no plans. He just watched and learned. He noticed that Westbridge kept a cash reserve in a secure room adjacent to the main vault. The cash was used for immediate wire transfers and emergency client withdrawals. The secure room had a combination lock, and Porter discovered that one of the senior partners, a man named Robert Chen, had a habit of writing the combination in a small notebook he kept in his desk drawer. Porter found this out one night in early 1985, when he accidentally knocked over a trash can in Chen's office and spent 10 minutes picking up scattered papers. The notebook had fallen open to a page of numbers. The numbers meant nothing to Porter at first, but over the following weeks, he began to piece things together. He noticed Chen accessing the secure room on Friday afternoons, usually around 4:30, just before the office closed. He noticed the small bags Chen carried, canvas bank bags, with the Westbridge logo embroidered on them, and he noticed that the secure room was not connected to the building's main alarm system because it was considered a secondary space, secured by its combination lock and the assumption that no one unauthorized would ever be on the floor after hours. Porter spent the entire year of 1985 building his plan. He studied the building's blueprint, which was posted in the maintenance office. He learned the guard rotation schedules by chatting casually with security personnel during his breaks. He mapped the blind spots in the camera coverage. He even befriended a locksmith who did occasional work for the building and learned the basics of combination locks. How they worked, how they could be opened, how they could be reset. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. He would enter the building on a Friday night using his legitimate access as a custodian. He would work his normal shift, cleaning the 23rd floor as he always did. But this time, he wouldn't leave when his shift ended. He would hide in a storage closet on the floor, a narrow space filled with cleaning supplies that security never checked during their rounds. He would wait until Saturday evening, when the building was at its quietest, and then he would use the combination he had memorized to access the secure room. He would take the cash, load it into trash bags, and walk out through the service entrance as if he were simply removing garbage. The beauty of the plan was that nothing would appear forced or broken. The combination lock would show no signs of tampering. The cash wouldn't be missed until Monday morning, and by then, Porter would be just another custodian who had worked his Friday night shift and gone home. But Porter was patient. He didn't rush. Throughout 1985 and into early 1986, he continued his routine, testing nothing, taking no unnecessary risks. He saved what little money he could and made arrangements. He found a cheap house to rent in Inglewood under a different name, paying 6 months up front in cash. He told his landlord he was going through a divorce and needed a fresh start. He stopped visiting his mother as frequently, making excuses about extra work shifts. He began slowly withdrawing from his life, creating distance between himself and everyone who knew him. The date he chose was September 12, 1986. It was a Friday, and Porter arrived at the Century Plaza Financial Center at his usual time, 11 p.m. He pushed his cleaning cart through the service entrance, nodded to the security guard on duty, and took the freight elevator to the upper floors. He started his shift on the 15th floor and worked his way up, just as he always did. When he reached the 23rd floor at approximately 2:30 a.m., he cleaned methodically. The Westbridge offices were silent and dark. He moved through the reception area, down the hallways, into the conference rooms. At 3:15 a.m., he radioed his supervisor to report that the 23rd floor was complete. His supervisor acknowledged and told him to proceed to the 25th floor, but Porter didn't proceed. Instead, he slipped into the storage closet he had selected months earlier, positioned his cleaning cart to partially obscure the door, and settled in to wait. The closet was cramped and airless. Porter sat on an overturned bucket, his back against shelves stocked with industrial cleaning products. He could hear the building's ventilation system humming, the occasional creak of settling architecture, the distant ding of elevator bells. At 4 a.m., he heard the security guard's footsteps in the hallway outside, making the scheduled round. The footsteps passed without slowing. Porter allowed himself a single deep breath. He waited until 7 a.m. when his shift officially ended. He heard other custodians moving through the building, finishing their work and heading home. He heard his supervisor's voice in the hallway, calling for him on the radio. Porter remained silent, motionless. Eventually, the supervisor gave up, probably assuming Porter had already left for the day. The building grew quiet again. Porter stayed in the closet for the next 12 hours. He had brought nothing with him. No food, no water, no book to pass the time. He simply waited, counting the minutes, listening to the rhythm of the building. He knew that appearing restless or prepared would only draw attention if something went wrong, so he waited with the same patience he had cultivated over the past 2 years. At 7 p.m. on Saturday evening, he finally emerged from the closet. The 23rd floor was dark and empty. He moved quickly but carefully to Robert Chen's office and retrieved the notebook from the desk drawer. The combination was still there, written in Chen's precise handwriting. Porter memorized it one final time, then returned the notebook exactly as he had found it. The secure room was at the end of a back hallway, away from the main office area. Porter approached it with his cleaning cart, maintaining the appearance of routine work in case any camera caught an unexpected angle. The combination lock was a standard rotary model, mounted on a heavy steel door. Porter's hands were steady as he dialed the numbers. Right to 14, left to 37, right to 9. The lock clicked open. Inside, the secure room was smaller than Porter had imagined, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet. Metal shelves lined 3 walls, holding files and ledgers, but his attention went immediately to the floor safe in the corner. A fireproof box with a simple key lock. This was the detail Porter had gambled on. The combination lock on the door was the primary security. The safe inside was considered backup, and its key was kept in the office, assuming anyone who had gotten through the door had already been granted access. Porter had located that key months earlier. It hung on a hook inside a filing cabinet in the records room, labelled simply Petty. He retrieved it now, hands still steady, and opened the safe. The cash was organised in neat bundles, wrapped in bank sleeves and stacked in rows. Porter began loading it into heavy-duty trash bags he had brought on his cleaning cart. He worked methodically, counting as he went. There were bundles of hundreds, 50s, 20s. Some were crisp and new, others worn from circulation. It took him nearly 40 minutes to empty the safe completely. When he finished, he had filled 3 large trash bags with approximately $1.1 million in cash. Porter closed the safe, locked it, and returned the key to its hook. He closed the secure room door and spun the combination lock. Everything appeared exactly as it had before. He loaded the trash bags onto the bottom rack of his cleaning cart and covered them with a tarp and additional cleaning supplies. Then he pushed the cart to the service elevator and descended to the ground floor. The security guard on duty that night was a man named Tom Vasquez, someone Porter had worked alongside for years. Vasquez was reading a magazine in the lobby when Porter emerged from the service elevator at 8:45 p.m. Porter waved casually and said he had been called in to handle a spill on one of the upper floors. Vasquez barely looked up, just nodded and returned to his magazine. Porter pushed his cart through the service entrance. and out to the loading dock, where custodial staff parked their vehicles. He loaded the trash bags into the trunk of his 1979 Chevrolet Malibu and drove away from the Century Plaza Financial Center for the last time. The entire theft had taken less than 90 minutes. No alarms had been triggered. No doors had been forced. Nothing had been disturbed beyond the missing cash, which wouldn't be discovered for another 60 hours. Porter drove directly to the house he had rented in Inglewood. It was a small, run-down property on a quiet street, the kind of place that drew no attention. He carried the trash bags inside and locked the door behind him. Then he sat on the bare floor of the empty living room, surrounded by $1.1 million in stolen cash, and felt the full weight of what he had done. The discovery came on Monday morning, September 15th, when Robert Chen opened the secure room to prepare for a large client withdrawal. He found the safe empty. The initial reaction was confusion rather than alarm. Perhaps the cash had been moved. Perhaps there had been a miscommunication. But as the morning progressed and phone calls were made, the reality became clear. The money was gone. The Los Angeles Police Department was notified at 11:30 a.m. Detectives arrived at the Century Plaza Financial Center by 1 p.m., led by a veteran investigator named Raymond Harris. Harris interviewed the Westbridge staff, examined the secure room, and reviewed the building's security footage. What he found was baffling. There were no signs of forced entry. The combination lock showed no tampering. The security cameras showed nothing unusual during the weekend. The only irregularity was that a custodian named Deshaun Porter had failed to report for his shift on Saturday night. But that seemed unrelated. The theft had clearly occurred before the weekend shift even began. Porter's name did eventually surface during the investigation, but only as one of dozens of building employees with routine access to the 23rd floor. Detectives interviewed him on September 18th at his apartment in Mid-City. Porter was cooperative and calm. He explained that he had worked his normal Friday night shift and gone home. Yes, he cleaned the Westbridge offices regularly, but no, he had never been inside the secure room and didn't even know it existed. The detectives noted his demeanor, quiet, unremarkable, perhaps a bit tired, and moved on to other leads. What investigators couldn't know was that Porter had spent Sunday, September 14th, executing the final phase of his plan. He had set fire to the house on Ashford Avenue. It was a deliberate act, carefully staged to look like an electrical fire. Porter had removed all evidence of the cash, the trash bags, any stray bills, anything that might have left a trace. He had hidden the money elsewhere, in a location he had prepared months in advance. Then he had rigged a simple accelerant in the house's basement and walked away. By the time the fire department arrived, the structure was engulfed. Investigators determined the cause was faulty wiring in the basement, a common problem in older Los Angeles homes. The house had been empty at the time, and no one was injured. It was treated as a routine fire, investigated and closed within a week. Porter had used the house as a temporary staging ground, nothing more. Its destruction eliminated any physical connection between him and the theft, and the real hiding place for the money was far more secure. In the weeks following the theft, Porter continued working at the Century Plaza Financial Center. He showed up for his shifts, pushed his cleaning cart, and went through his routines. Other custodians talked about the robbery. It was the biggest excitement the building had seen in years. But Porter participated in these conversations with the same mild interest he showed in everything else. He expressed appropriate surprise and concern, then changed the subject. The FBI joined the investigation in October, treating it as a possible inside job with interstate implications. Agents conducted extensive background checks on everyone with access to the building, including Porter. They found nothing suspicious. No unusual bank deposits, no sudden purchases, no change in lifestyle. Porter lived in the same apartment, drove the same old car, and worked the same job. He was, in every measurable way, exactly who he appeared to be. By December 1986, the investigation had stalled. Westbridge Capital Group recovered most of its losses through insurance, though the theft remained a black mark on the firm's reputation. Security was upgraded throughout the Century Plaza Financial Center. New cameras, new protocols, new locks. But the money was gone, and the thief had vanished into thin air. What investigators never discovered was where Porter had actually hidden the cash. During his months of planning, he had purchased a small storage unit in Compton under a false name, paying for 3 years in advance with cash. The unit was in a facility that required no identification and no background checks, just cash up front and a padlock for the door. Porter had gradually moved the stolen money there, making trips at odd hours, carrying gym bags and backpacks that drew no attention. The bills were sorted and bundled, sealed in waterproof containers, and hidden inside old furniture and boxes that appeared to contain nothing valuable. For the next several years, Porter lived with meticulous discipline. He continued working as a custodian, moving between different buildings and employers, but never rising above his station. He rented cheap apartments and drove used cars. He dated occasionally, but never seriously. He sent money to his mother's nursing home, but never more than his legitimate income could justify. He was careful, patient, invisible. He did, however, begin slowly accessing the stolen money. Every few months, he would retrieve a small amount, never more than a few $1,000s, and use it to quietly improve his life in ways that wouldn't attract attention. He paid off his mother's medical debts gradually, claiming he had taken on extra work. He took a modest vacation to Las Vegas in 1988, explaining he had saved for a year. He moved to a slightly better apartment in 1990. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise questions, just small improvements that made his life marginally more comfortable. Porter's mother passed away in 1992, and he felt the loss deeply. The money that had motivated so much of his planning now seemed less important. He had enough in his legitimate savings to pay for a simple funeral, and he did so, standing alone at the graveside in a cemetery in Inglewood. Afterward, he returned to his apartment and continued his quiet life. By the mid-1990s, the Westbridge theft had faded from public memory. The Century Plaza Financial Center had changed ownership. Most of the original Westbridge staff had moved on to other firms. The case remained officially open but inactive, a cold file in a warehouse full of cold files. Porter himself had changed jobs, now working as a maintenance supervisor at a community college in Pasadena. The work was more respectable, and the pay was slightly better. He had even started taking evening classes, earning credits toward a degree he would never complete. He was 50 years old, living alone, and seemingly content with his modest circumstances. The storage unit in Compton remained undisturbed, its contents a secret Porter shared with no one. But living with such a secret exacted a toll. Porter developed insomnia in his 40s, lying awake at night replaying the theft in his mind. He became hypervigilant, attuned to every police car that passed, every official letter that arrived, every unexpected knock on his door. He trusted no one completely and formed no deep relationships. The isolation he had cultivated as protection became a prison. In 2001, Porter finally decided to move the money from the storage unit to a more permanent location. The facility in Compton was deteriorating, and he worried about theft or fire. He rented a small house in Baldwin Hills, a modest property with a basement, a rarity in Los Angeles. Over several months, he transported the cash from the storage unit to the house, hiding it in a custom-built compartment beneath the basement floor. The compartment was sealed behind concrete and covered with old carpeting and furniture. It was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Porter lived in that house for the next 7 years. He continued working, continued living modestly, continued waiting for a future he couldn't quite envision. He was 61 years old in 2005, eligible for retirement but reluctant to draw attention to himself by making any major changes. The money beneath his basement floor represented both security and imprisonment, and he had long since lost track of which dominated his thoughts. Close calls were rare but terrifying. In 2003, the Baldwin Hills house was burglarized while Porter was at work. The thieves took his television and some electronics but never entered the basement. Porter came home to find his living room ransacked and felt a wave of panic that left him shaking for hours. The police filed a report and dusted for prints, walking through every room, including the basement. They found nothing unusual and eventually closed the case, but Porter couldn't shake the feeling that his secret had nearly been exposed. Another close call came in 2006, when the IRS audited Porter's tax returns for the previous 3 years. The audit was routine, triggered by random selection rather than any specific suspicion. Porter's records were simple and clean. He had never reported income beyond his legitimate wages. The auditor found no discrepancies and closed the case with a polite letter. But for 3 weeks, Porter barely slept, convinced that this was the beginning of the end. The years blurred together. Porter turned 65 in 2008 and finally retired from his job at the community college. He received a small pension and social security benefits, enough to maintain his modest lifestyle. He spent his days reading, watching television, and taking long walks through his neighborhood. He was polite to his neighbors, but kept his distance. He attended a local church occasionally, but never joined any groups or committees. He was, as he had always been, invisible. And then came the fire inspection that changed everything. In July 2008, the city of Los Angeles implemented a new program requiring safety inspections of all residential properties in certain high-risk areas. Baldwin Hills was included due to its hilly terrain and wildfire concerns. Property owners received notices that inspectors would be conducting mandatory checks of smoke detectors, electrical systems, and structural integrity. Porter's inspection was scheduled for August 12, 2008. The inspector was Gerald Williams, a 47-year-old fire safety officer who had worked for the Los Angeles Fire Department for 23 years. Williams was thorough and professional, the kind of inspector who checked every room and asked detailed questions. He arrived at Porter's house at 10 a.m. and introduced himself with a friendly handshake. The inspection proceeded normally through the main floor. Williams checked smoke detectors, examined the electrical panel, and made notes on his clipboard. Porter followed him through the house, answering questions and trying to appear relaxed. When Williams asked to see the basement, Porter felt his pulse quicken, but he led the inspector downstairs without hesitation. The basement was dimly lit and cluttered with old furniture and boxes. Williams examined the foundation walls, looking for cracks or moisture damage. He checked the water heater and the furnace, and then, as he was completing his inspection, he noticed something odd. In one corner of the basement, partially hidden by a stack of storage boxes, there was a section of floor where the carpeting didn't quite align. The seam was irregular, as if the carpet had been cut and replaced imperfectly. Williams might have ignored it. It wasn't directly related to fire safety. But something about the irregularity caught his attention. He moved the boxes aside and knelt down to examine the floor more closely. The carpeting was loose in that section, and beneath it, he could see what appeared to be a concrete patch that didn't match the surrounding floor. Williams looked up at Porter and asked if there had been any recent repairs to the basement. Porter said no. The house had been this way when he moved in. Williams nodded, but remained crouched on the floor, studying the patch. Then, almost without thinking, he pulled back the loose carpeting. What he found beneath stunned him into silence. The concrete patch was actually a removable panel, carefully fitted but not permanently sealed, and visible through a gap in the panel was the corner of what appeared to be a plastic storage container. Williams was a fire safety inspector, not a police officer. His job was to check for hazards, not to investigate suspicious flooring. But 23 years of experience had taught him to recognize when something was very wrong. He stood up and asked Porter directly what was under the floor. Porter's first instinct was to lie, to claim ignorance, to say the panel had been installed by a previous owner. But as he looked at Williams's face, serious, alert, already certain that something significant was hidden there, he felt 22 years of carefully maintained composure crumble. He sat down heavily on the basement stairs and said nothing. Williams called the police. Within 2 hours, Baldwin Hills was flooded with law enforcement. LAPD detectives arrived first, followed by federal agents when it became clear that the discovery might be related to a major financial crime. The basement was cordoned off as a crime scene. A warrant was obtained to remove the concrete panel and examine what lay beneath. What they found was extraordinary. Beneath the false floor was a custom-built compartment measuring approximately 4 feet by 6 feet. Inside were multiple waterproof containers, each filled with cash. The bills were old, many from the 1980s, bundled and sealed with precision. Initial estimates suggested the total was close to $900,000. Not all of the original $1.1 million, but a substantial portion. Porter was arrested and taken into custody. At the police station, he initially refused to speak without an attorney, but after several hours and consultation with a public defender, he began to talk. The story came out slowly, in pieces. The years of planning, the theft itself, the decades of hiding. Detectives were astounded by the confession. Most assumed they were dealing with a recent crime, but as Porter explained the timeline, they realized they were looking at a cold case more than 2 decades old. Investigators pulled the old Westbridge Capital Group file and confirmed Porter's account. The dates matched, the amount matched, the method matched. Raymond Harris, the original detective, had retired years earlier, but when contacted by current investigators, he remembered the case vividly. He recalled interviewing Porter in 1986 and finding him unremarkable, forgettable. The irony wasn't lost on him. The legal proceedings that followed were complex. Porter was charged with grand theft, burglary, and several related financial crimes. His attorney argued that the statute of limitations had expired on some charges, but prosecutors countered that Porter's continued possession of the stolen money constituted an ongoing crime. The case dragged through the courts for 18 months. In the end, Porter pleaded guilty to reduce charges in exchange for returning all recovered funds and cooperating with investigators. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, with credit for time served. Given his age, 67 at sentencing, and his clean record aside from the 1986 theft, he was granted eligibility for early release after serving 4 years. The recovered money, diminished by Porter's careful spending over 22 years, was returned to the insurance company that had paid out Westbridge Capital Group's claim. The firm itself had long since dissolved, its partners scattered to other ventures. Robert Chen, the senior partner whose careless notebook had enabled the theft, had passed away in 2003. Porter served his sentence at a minimum security federal facility in Central California. He was a model prisoner, quiet and cooperative. He took prison classes and worked in the facility library. Other inmates found him pleasant but distant, unwilling to discuss his crime in detail. He was released in November 2012 at age 72 and returned to Los Angeles to live in a halfway house while completing his parole. Today, Deshaun Porter lives in a small apartment in Long Beach. He survives on Social Security and occasional work as a janitor. He has no savings, no assets, no family. The millions he stole and hid are gone, seized by the government and returned to their rightful owners. The years he spent in hiding, 22 years of isolation, paranoia, and secret wealth, led ultimately to a prison cell and a life of permanent poverty. The case had lasting implications for security practices in financial centers. The Century Plaza Financial Center, though long since rebranded and renovated, implemented comprehensive security overhauls that became industry standards. Secure rooms were connected to central alarm systems. Background checks for custodial staff became more rigorous. Access protocols were tightened. But perhaps the most significant impact was on how investigators approached cold cases. The Westbridge theft demonstrated that even perfectly executed crimes could be undone by chance. A routine inspection, an observant official, a misaligned carpet seam. Police departments across the country were reminded that cold cases were never truly closed, that evidence could emerge decades later in the most unexpected ways. For Gerald Williams, the fire safety inspector who made the discovery, the experience was surreal. He had gone to the Baldwin Hills house expecting a routine inspection, and instead stumbled into one of the longest-running unsolved thefts in Los Angeles history. He received commendations from the LAPD and the FBI, though he insisted he had simply been doing his job. In interviews, he expressed sympathy for Porter, a man who had spent the better part of his life imprisoned by his own success. The story of Deshaun Porter and the Ashford Avenue fire remains a cautionary tale about the price of theft and deception. Porter had achieved something remarkable, a nearly flawless crime that evaded detection for over 2 decades. But the wealth he stole brought him no peace, no security, no real improvement to his life. Instead, it brought isolation, fear, and ultimately imprisonment. In his final interview before being released from federal custody, Porter was asked if he regretted the theft. He paused for a long time before answering. He said he regretted hurting the people at Westbridge, regretted the stress he caused investigators, regretted the years he lost. But what he regretted most, he said, was the moment he stepped into that storage closet on the 23rd floor. That was the moment he traded his freedom for money he could never really spend, security he could never really feel, and a future he could never really enjoy. The money, he said, had been worthless from the start. He just hadn't realized it until it was far too late. The house on Ashford Avenue, the one Porter burned in 1986, was eventually rebuilt and sold to a young family in the early 1990s. They knew nothing of its history, nothing of the role it played in one of Los Angeles's most patient crimes. The basement where Porter had briefly stored his stolen fortune became a playroom for their children. Gerald Williams retired from the fire department in 2015, his career marked by that single extraordinary discovery. He sometimes drives past the Baldwin Hills house, where he found the hidden compartment, marveling at how close Porter came to succeeding. Deshaun Porter, now in his 80s, remains in Long Beach. He walks along the beach most mornings, an elderly man indistinguishable from countless others. Neighbors who know his story are few. Those who ask about his past receive vague answers about working in maintenance, nothing more. The $1.1 million he stole in 1986 would be worth over $3 million today. Porter will die with nothing, having spent 22 years as a secret millionaire and the rest of his life paying for it. Some crimes, it seems, carry sentences that no court can impose, sentences measured not in years behind bars, but in decades of fear, isolation, and the haunting knowledge of what might have been.